Welcome to the YouTube channel for my new book, Seed of Israel, DNA Guide to Tracing Your Jewish Ancestry, available on Amazon in ebook and paperback versions. Links to order your copies are below. Also be sure to hit that subscribe button to receive more videos like this. In this video, I'm going to talk about how the Sephardic Jews were not just expelled from Spain and Portugal, but that there were other lesser known expulsions from territories under the crown of Aragon, where Castile and Aragon, where Jews were expelled, including Sicily, Malta, and Calabria in southern Italy. And now while all these Jews obviously were not Sephardic Jews, who were specifically from Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, many of these Sephardic Jews that fled Spain, particularly to some of these other places that were not necessarily at that time in 1492 and the years following under the Spanish crown, but later became under Spanish rule, and then wherever the Spanish and then the Portuguese also wherever they conquered, they brought the Inquisition with them as well, and then eventually expulsions, which I'll get into. So let's just talk about a little bit about, which I think a lot of people are probably more familiar with, the 1492 expulsion of the Jews of Spain. And then I'm going to talk about some of these lesser known expulsions. So the Alhambra decree, and I'm going to leave links to all of this below. All the information is below. So if you want to do a deeper dive, please feel free. So the Alhambra decree, also known as the Edict of Expulsion, in Spanish, the Decreto de la Alhambra, or the Edicto de Granada, was an edict issued on March 31st, 1492, by the joint Catholic monarchs of Spain, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, who were it was a result of the earlier marriage between the two. Well, they ordered the expulsion of practicing Jews from the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon and its territories and possessions by July 31st of that year. So we all know that story, but what were those territories and possessions, and when did these expulsions take place? How many Jews were expelled? Where did they end up? What was the Sephardic Diaspora following these expulsions? So we know that in Spain the entire Jewish community was expelled, and there are some figures say 200,000 Jews were expelled from Spain. We also know that many of these Jews fled to neighboring Portugal and also the independent kingdom of Navarre. And as you can see from this map that I provided, you can see the location of Navarre. It's sort of, I guess, northeastern Spain, right in the border of France there. So what happened to these Jews who sought refuge in Portugal and Navarre? Well, eventually they were forcibly converted to Christianity. That happened within a few years of what they thought was a safe haven from the persecution in Spain. So again, in 1492, Spain expelled its Jewish population as part of the Spanish Inquisition. Tens of thousands of Spanish Jews, fled to Portugal, where King John II granted them asylum in return for payment. However, this asylum was only temporary. As I stated, after 8 months, the Portuguese government decreed the enslavement of all Jews who had not yet left the country. In 1493, King John deported several hundred Jewish children to the newly discovered colony of Sao Tome, where many of them perished. And there's some pretty horrific stories. I don't know how accurate they are about exactly how these Jewish children died in this colony, this island, which I believe is off the western coast of Africa, Sao Tome. So following John's death in 1494, the new King Manuel I of Portugal, he restored the freedom of the Jews. However, in 1497, under the pressure of Spain through the marriage of Isabella, Princess of Asturias, the church and some Christians among the Portuguese people, King Manuel I of Portugal, decreed that all Jews had to convert to Christianity or leave the country without their children. Hard times followed for these Portuguese Jews. There was a massacre of 2,000 Jews in Lisbon in 1506. And if you visit Lisbon, there's a memorial to this massacre. And again, the forced deportations to Sao Tome, as I described earlier, where apparently I guess there's still a Jewish presence there today. So, and later, even more relevant establishment of the Portuguese Inquisition in 1536. Remember, the Inquisition lasted many, many hundreds of years. And it wasn't actually only until the modern era that in some of these places that the Inquisition actually officially ended. But what are some of these places that were under Spanish rule where Jews were expelled? Well, one of those places was Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean, just south of the Italian peninsula. So the expulsion of the Jews from Sicily began in 1493, when the Spanish Inquisition reached the island of Sicily and its population of more than 30,000 Jews. Sicily had accepted the crown of Aragon in 1412, and Aragonese rule, the crown of Aragon, began in 1479 in both Sicily and Malta. So many of these Jews of Sicily, just like the Jews of Spain, had fled to Portugal for safe haven, and of course later realized that it was nothing at all a safe haven, as they were persecuted there in Portugal and Navarro. Well, many of these Jews fled to Calabria, which is a region in southern Italy. But as I will get into, it was not maybe the best place for them to flee to. So, Malta. What about the Jews of Malta? Malta is a little tiny island just south of Sicily, north of Tunisia, right there in the central Mediterranean there. Well, at the beginning of the 15th century, like I said earlier, the crown of Sicily was combined with the crown of Aragon, and says the relative tolerance shown to the Jewish community of Malta was gradually eroded in parallel with the growing antagonism towards the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula. And it says in 1492, when the Edict of Expulsion was issued in Spain, the Royal Council tried to argue that Malta was a special case, since the expulsion of the Jews would radically reduce the archipelago's total population. But if anything, the Jews of Malta were treated with even less mercy, actually having to pay the crown compensation for the loss of tributes caused by their forced departure. Upon leaving, each person was allowed to take just one suit of common clothing, a mattress, a pair of worn sheets, and a little food for their journey. No one knows where the exiles went to, but they may have become part of the Sicilian community, which remained a separate group throughout the Levant. So that's a little bit of a clue about what I'm going to talk about later as far as the Sephardic Expulsion and dispersion, diaspora, but also some of these other communities like in Sicily and Malta. Well, where did they end up after being expelled by the Spanish crown? Well, a lot of them ended up in the Levant, the land of Israel. So in 1479, Malta and Sicily again came under Aragonese rule. The 1492 Edict of Expulsion forced all the Jews to leave the country. Because they made up such a large portion of the island's population, like I said earlier, the Spanish crown forced them to pay compensation for the losses caused by the expulsion. So it says it's not clear where the Jews of Malta went, but again, as I stated earlier, they may have joined the Sicilian community in the Levant. And it also says it's likely that several dozen Maltese Jews converted to Christianity to remain in the country, as did many Sicilian Jews. This is further evidenced by the large number of Maltese surnames thought to be of Jewish origin. Now, this is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit as well, but, with all these Jews that were expelled from Sicily, Malta, southern Italy, well, not a lot of them were forcibly converted, or, they were crypto Jews, or Anusim, as it's called in Hebrew, and basically conversos, A lot of them never went back to Judaism. After a few generations, they just completely assimilated. And just like they've done genetic studies on many, people from Spain and Portugal, and also Latin America, where their descendants live. And they found that, many Iberians of Iberian origin had Sephardic Jewish ancestry. Well, they're finding that not an insignificant amount of Southern Italians and Sicilians and Maltese have some Jewish ancestry too, possibly up to maybe 15% of people in Sicily and southern Italy have Jewish ancestry. So, well, there were other places too that Jews were expelled around this time period. One of them was Sardinia. In 1325, Sardinia fell under the rule of the Spanish Kingdom of Aragon. For the first century during Spanish rule, life was more or less pleasant for Sardinian Jews. During this time, Spanish Jews began to arrive and settle the island. The Jewish inhabitants of Marseille, fleeing violence in 1484 and again in 1485, and leading to an exodus of Jews from the city, settled in Sardinia, which became home to about 200 Jewish families from Marseille. Also in 1485, the Jews of Sardinia were declared property of the King of Aragon and were governed by his authority alone. So many of these Jewish families lived in the Sardinian capital of Cagliari, where there was a large synagogue. This synagogue was eventually forcibly converted into the Roman Catholic Church of Santa Croce. The largest Jewish community in Sardinia was located in the city of Alghero. So basically, what happened was life became harder for these Jews in Sardinia. It was good for a while, but like these other places, it became hard. And a decree was issued in 1481 that fixed penalties for an offense against Christianity and for the employment of Christian servants. In 1492, the Spanish crown, again with the Alhambra decree, ordered the expulsion of Jews in Spain. Later that year, the Jews of Sardinia and also Corsica were also ordered to leave. So many Sardinian Jews, which is, again, it seems to be a theme, an ongoing story here, many of these Jews that were expelled from Sardinia and Corsica ended up in Malta, Greece, and Calabria. Now, other than Greece, they were going to be later expelled from Malta and Calabria. So it says Sardinia is also mentioned in the Inquisition records pertaining to a population of Marranos. So Calabria. Well, what happened in Calabria? Well, like I said, many Jews fleeing Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia went to Calabria. In 1510, the first in a series of Jewish expulsions began in Calabria. The final blow of the Calabrian Jews culminated when the Spanish Inquisition, at last reached Calabria. By 1541, the Roman Catholic Church ordered the last Jews of Calabria to either leave or convert to Catholicism. For those who could afford to leave, most went to the Greek cities of Arta, Corfu, and Thessaloniki. The Calabrian Jews were a sizable block in the Jewish community of Thessaloniki, where they constituted 4 of the 30 synagogues in the city. A Calabrian Jewish synagogue, which was located in Constantinople, is also known. And this is very tragic, but unfortunately this is just part of our history. 400 years later, the last direct descendants of these Calabrian Jews living in Greece would perish in the Holocaust. So, like I said earlier, there were many forced conversions to Catholicism and many crypto-Jews, or Anusim, in Italy, in the Italian peninsula and Sicily and Malta. So just like in Iberia, many southern Italians and Sicilians have Jewish ancestry. Like I said, again, possibly 15% of Calabrians and Sicilians have Jewish ancestry. So another place that Jews fled to that they thought was a safe haven but was not was Naples. In 1492, again, many Jews who were expelled from Spain came to Naples, where King Ferdinand protected them. However, in 1495, the French conquered the kingdom and persecuted its Jews. In 1510, Spain won control of the city and expelled the Jews. But those who paid 300 ducati were permitted to stay. In 1535, the price was raised, forcing many Jews to leave, and by 1541, all Jews of Naples had left. So where did the Jews of Spain, Portugal, Sicily, Sardinia, Calabria, and Naples end up? Well, places like Amsterdam, North Africa, and the Middle East. And a lot of this territory was governed by the Ottoman Empire. So a lot of these Jews, they fled to Ottoman lands, mainly to the cities of Thessaloniki in Greece, which I discussed earlier regarding the Calabrian Jews. They went to Izmir, which is currently in Turkey. Many of these Jews also settled in other parts of the Balkans, ruled by the Ottomans, such as the areas that are now Bulgaria, Serbia, and Bosnia. The Jews who stayed in North Africa, in the Maghreb, they often intermingled with the already existing Mizrahi Arabic or Berber-speaking communities, being the ancestors of the Moroccan, Algerian, Tunisian, and Libyan Jewish communities. The Sicilian Jewish community, I earlier had stated that some of them went to the Levant, to the land of Israel, which at the time was part of the Ottoman Empire. Others went to Greece, others Cyprus, and others to Turkey. And as you can see from this map, later on during the 17th and 18th centuries, Sephardic Jews made their way to the New World, where the first Jews in what would be known as the United States landed in the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, and they came from Recife, Brazil. After the Portuguese took it over, they brought the Inquisition with them and the auto de fés, which were trials where sometimes Jews were burned at the stake. As again I mentioned earlier, Sephardic Jews also settled in Amsterdam in the Netherlands because the Dutch were very tolerant. Portuguese Jews established a community in Hamburg, Germany. And Sephardic Jews even made their way to London, Paris, Vienna, and Krakow, Poland. Thank you for watching.